Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our interview with the Pheasant Biologist series. I am Renee Tamala, the regional representative for Pheasants Forever in North Dakota. And then we've also got Rachel Bush, our North Dakota Pheasants Forever state coordinator with us. So, special guest today, we have Dr. Ben Geaumont. Ben is a wildlife and range specialist with NDSU Extension in Hettinger, North Dakota, down in the Southwest. And Ben also serves as chapter president for our Cedar Creek chapter of Pheasants Forever. So welcome, Ben.
Good morning. Thanks for having me here.
All right, so to kick us off, Ben, can you tell us a little bit about what you do as a wildlife and range specialist?
Sure. I work at the Hettinger Research Extension Center. We're located in Southwest North Dakota, so kind of the good area for pheasant in the state most years. But anyway, down here, my job is basically to study, or I do research on the interaction between wildlife and agriculture, and look for ways to mitigate things that may be negative, and also highlight findings that are beneficial. So we run. I work closely with scientists on campus, some colleagues at NDSU, and we have several graduate students and summer techs that work with us throughout the year and the summer. So that's basically what we do down here, at least from my part of the station.
Awesome. Well, very cool. So how long have you been volunteering for Pheasants Forever?
I moved to Hettinger probably around 2009, and it was shortly after that. So I would say around 2010, the group approached me about maybe just becoming part of their group. And I guess so since about 2010.
Awesome. Well, they were right to come find you and seek you out because you're a good addition.
Well, when I first was hired down here, I was just, I came down as a graduate student, as a PhD student to study pheasants. So everyone down here just kind of connected me with pheasants. So when I moved here full time, they figured, oh, pheasant guy, he should be on our group. So I guess that's how I ended up there.
I was just going to ask if you got the label pheasant guy.
I did really quickly. It was funny because I was a grad student down here, and but I still lived in Fargo to do my work. And then one of your state meetings many years ago, I was there presenting the work, and a group of people from Hettinger showed up and said, "You were doing that in our backyard," and it was just you're the pheasant guy from the so, it's okay.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think all grad students get labeled with whatever species they're, the blackbird student, the bobcat student, the pheasant guy.
Yeah, people see you present on something once and they just figure, well, that's that guy's whole life. And pheasants are a big part of my life, but I do other studies too. So, but
I'm gonna call you the pheasant guy from now on.
Yeah. That's fine.
So since your time on as president or just with volunteering with Cedar Creek, what is something that stands out to you that you are exceptionally proud of that the Cedar Creek chapter has accomplished?
Well, we're a very small group. One thing that I like about Pheasants Forever in general is we have the opportunity to keep some of our money local. So one of the things that we started to do several years ago was I teamed with Game and Fish, the private lands biologist there. And then back then we had a Pheasants Forever person in our office, not in our office, but in the Soil Conservation District office in Adams County. So I worked with them. And we started this little program where I would use the drill from my work, because I have a no-till drill here at the office, and we could, as part of my job, or not really my job, but I could volunteer with it. And I went out and started planting food plots, primarily on Game and Fish plots land, because I always found that a lot of the food plots were not real good. They were okay, but they weren't put a lot of effort into them. So we started Pheasants Forever would buy the food plot seed. I would go out with my own personal time and seed the food plots, and then the research station or NDSU would kind of volunteer or let me use the drill to do this. So it's a cool project. As part of it, I also collected data on those, looking at insects way back in 2012. We started doing that. So I think that's been something that is a program that we've kind of created down here that's done fairly well. In fact, I have to tell people no. I've got about 8 or 9 landowners now that I just work with, and that's about all I can do. And then a few years ago, we also kicked in some money for some plots of land in the Badlands, and because I hunt that area some, I thought that was pretty fun too.
I'm hoping to draw that mule deer buck tag for that unit, and
that would be pretty cool
this year. I mean, fingers crossed.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool. That's a great spot out there, and that added some really cool land to the area.
Yeah, it's a really nice. I mean, the chapter stepped up, and it's a really nice patchwork of federal land, and you guys were able to help, the Game and Fish Department patch those federal lands together with plots land, so it makes a really nice matrix of public land out there.
Right. I think that's something that we like to do, and I know that a lot of chapter people have gone over there and checked it
out. Well, very cool.
Awesome. I'm gonna let Rachel switch gears here for us.
So Ben, while you did say, you're known as the pheasant guy, you did make a comment that you worked on, other species and have interest outside of ringnecks too. I was actually perusing through, I try to keep up on, some of the peer-reviewed science that comes out, and I actually ran across a publication that you had authored looking at sharp-tailed grouse brood habitat and habitat selection. Obviously Pheasants Forever is an organization that puts a great deal of habitat on the ground. So it's really good to see research out there like this that can help us as habitat creators or managers, make the best decisions that, for the birds based on science. So, can you tell us, from that work that you did on sharp-tailed grouse, can you tell us a little bit about why understanding habitat needs of broods is important?
Sure. Yeah. So pheasants. I'm getting a lot. Let me see. Oh, that's better. Whatever that was, that fixed it a lot. So broods in general. So, everyone knows about nesting and how important nesting is. The hen sits there on her nest. It's her job to sit there for 23 days or so and just sit there and really just hatch the eggs. It's a dangerous time for her. But brooding, once she hatches those chicks and has to start leading her family really across the landscape as a group, that's a very dangerous time for the brood in general, as well as the hen. But it's a very important time because those chicks or those birds are the ones that are going to recruit into our population. So I find brooding to be more fascinating than the nesting. The nesting's cool, but it's one site. The brooding is changing all of the time. She's leading these chicks, precocial birds, so she leads her chicks to the food or to the cover. And that's why, we've chosen to study brooding. It's another important part of their biology. Down for this particular study, we did, it was done on the Grand River National Grasslands, which is just 5 miles south of where I am here in Hettinger, so in South Dakota. But it's large. It expands quite a large area, but the near ones are about 5 miles from where I sit now. But it's funny, once you go across the border from North Dakota to South Dakota, it's a much larger, I won't say ranching community, but there's more grasslands down there. So we don't have as many pheasants down there as you do grouse, because the grouse need the more expansive grasslands. So this study was done on Forest Service ground, and as many of you probably know, they manage their ground for multiple land uses. So they got to be paying attention to a lot of different things, and they use the grouse as kind of an indicator or management species. So they manage for the grouse. On the Grand River, grazing is their primary management tool. So there's allotments, and so grazing is a big part of their management down there. And as comes with grazing is fencing and water developments and roads, not only to get out to the water developments, but these are also recreational roads. And these are all things that may or may not affect grouse. So, there's a lot of stuff going on there down on the Grand. And so we just took a look at it over several years as part of the nesting study, but for 3 years, we focused a lot on the brooding study.
So, this will be broadcast out to some of our members, but obviously some biologists in the audience too. Can you just kind of share with the audience kind of how you go about determining what habitat broods are using? I mean, the methodology, the bird handling, capture, stuff like that.
Sure. So that's really the, you know, the end part of the writing and the doing the statistics is cool because you get to find things that you didn't see. But collecting the data for me is really the fun, and it really opens your eyes to things. So for grouse, what we did was we trapped the hens. We trapped them on the leks. Grouse, sharp-tailed grouse are lekking species. So each spring they gather on leks. The males dance to attract females or to show their dominant, whatever the reason may be. And the females come in, and that's where the breeding takes place. But we are right around that area. But we would put use chicken wire and just traps, funnel traps, and you can kind of lead these birds. They come in, they want to be in a specific area, and they go down and they end up in these traps. And then we put on the females, we radio collars. So we put radio collars on the females, and then we monitor using telemetry equipment how they're using the landscape. So when they're nesting, you know, once we found the nest, we didn't really disturb them very often. We know where the nest is, but there's a few ways candling, but where you can tell how, and with the telemetry, we had a pretty good idea of when she probably initiated her nest because we've been watching her. But we also can use candling, but for these darker eggs to estimate when the hatch date is, I often use a egg floating device where I'll get a little thing of water and set the egg in there. And as it comes closer to hatch, it becomes more buoyant and floats to the top. Anyway, I use telemetry and I can kind of estimate when I expect this brood or this nest to hatch. And then from the day I expected it to hatch, we really started monitoring the broods a little more closely. So we're following the hen around and just following what habitat she used. And then try to once a week or maybe twice a week, try to count the chicks, which is very difficult to do. For this study, we were just more concerned with, yep, there's a chick. So we called it a sort of a brood. But when these chicks are really little, I don't like to play around in the brood because you can step on them. And it's just, so if we saw a chick, we called it a brood. We monitored these birds for as long as we could before they dispersed in October or September, before they start to separate from the brood. And then we go out and just kind of look and do surveys on not only the microhabitat or what's going on immediately at the brood site, say 12 meters around the brood site, look at structure and look at the heights and the different types of grasses and forbs that are there. But then also we go back and we overlay these on a computer, and we can start to do a landscape look at where these birds are moving and what types of areas are they using or are they avoiding. And then we take some of that data and we can look at the survival of the broods, as a whole, not individual chicks, because to do that, you really, really, I feel, need to put monitors on the chicks. I mean, you can get an idea. There's a lot of published data out there where they count the chicks, but from what I've seen, it's best, if you're going to do individual chicks, to probably monitoring them. But from our standpoint, it was more just, did the brood survive? So you're babysitting these birds for months, and you try to do so in a way that doesn't disturb them, and which sometimes it's real easy to do. Other times, I bumped them. So, there's sometimes that happens, but you get to know a lot about what they're doing. And then you take, we took the measurements we thought beforehand mattered. And then we also took a few that we noticed during our study that before the brood study started, we were just monitoring hens, that these areas of like these drainage areas that stayed really green during the summer when everything else was just dry. We don't get a lot of rain out here. Broods were really using those. So, that was a variable we looked at as well during this study. So yeah, the monitoring them and following them around is the fun part, Yeah.
So do you do a lot of that yourself, or do you bring in seasonal technicians and all the fun stuff we did as undergrads,
Yeah. Yeah, so we do. Most of my projects have grad student associated with them. This one was just one I really want to do. So that's a good thing about my job. I can kind of pick the ones I really want to do. But yeah, we have this job. This could not have been done without a lot of undergraduate and graduate technicians collecting veg data. I also have a full-time research technician that works for me full-time, because monitoring these broods is a lot of work in the telemetry. And as a research institution, but also an educational institution, we need to be providing us younger folks, or when we were younger, there's opportunities. So very much so, there's those opportunities. It's like now we have students out here looking at pollinators and pheasants and ducks and honeybees. So there's just a lot of things going on, and it's a good opportunity for these students.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So based kind of, I mean, since it's a published paper, I'm sure results and conclusions have been made. Can you just kind of share, the summary of that project and really what you did find about brood habitat for grouse?
Yeah, so what we looked at a lot of different things down there, a lot of different variables, both at the micro habitat level and at the landscape level. And what we found is they depend on a lot of different things. And it's not just as simple as saying A or B is what's driving it. In fact, when it came to selection, or how the birds were using the landscape, or even these micro habitat areas for just slight selection, those areas didn't necessarily line up with the ones that ended up being important for survival. Like for selection standpoint, we did find that those drainage areas were important. We don't exactly know why. We think there's some thermal things, or maybe some insect stuff, grasshoppers go into those areas. So we're not exactly sure why we found that, but we did see that, and the statistics showed it. There was also, some microhabitats. They don't like a lot of litter. The broods did, areas with a lot of litter, and we suspect that has to do with movement, or again, maybe the thermal environment. They didn't like areas that had a lot of bare ground, and I could see, well, it heats up, right? Bare ground heats up, and maybe that's not where they want to be, or maybe the insects are not there. So as far as site selection, those were three pretty important things. But when it came to survival, and we tested the exact same models, those aren't the ones that mattered. What mattered was, as the slope of the landscape increased, the survival decreased, and that might have to do with the ability to escape a predator. If they come over the top and they can get to you quicker or something like that. One thing I did think was very important that we found was the influence of fences on survival. So basically survival, as the hens spent more time or got nearer to a fence, survival decreased, which is not unheard of. Fence lines harbor predators. One way or another, predators sit up there and can look down. They walk up and down, the lines hunting. Maybe there was some, there's been some indication that fence lines can, birds hit them. We didn't see any of that, but for whatever reason, fence lines were decreasing the survival of these broods, which is a little bit, that's really a management issue that we can take care of. We're not going to change the slope of the landscape, but we can address the fencing issue to some degree or another. And I think that's an important finding, especially today as we start in the Northern Great Plains, start doing more of this rotational grazing and these deferments and these types of things that depend on a lot of fencing. For some birds, such as sharp-tailed grouse in grassland country, that might not be such a good thing. But I have seen some real positive things. I mean, there's folks out there that do this same, if they want to do that type of grazing system, that's up to them. But I've seen them do some really good stuff with electric fence. I mean, with how fast they can move electric fence these days. I think electric fence isn't as quick to create a corridor for a predator maybe, and it doesn't stay up there as long. So there may be some options, and that's just me thinking. There's not a lot of data, I guess, there, but there are some ways to maybe mitigate this fence finding. And then, as with many birds, we found that the structure, maintaining structure and height is important to grouse. They need to be able to hide from predators, whether they're adults or young, and also probably has a lot to do with the thermal environment as well. The structure, the density of the vegetation. Because this thermal environment, I think, is something that we really need to start looking at more. There has been more and more studies on it, but we can't always control the climate at all. So if we can do things that help mitigate some of that thermal environment on the ground, that's important, I think, in the future. So this is a cool little study. It was really fun to do, and I'm just glad to get it out there.
No, thanks for sharing. I mean, I was interested and I read the paper, but it's awesome to hear you talking about it too. And obviously you're passionate about it. We can hear that in the excitement in your voice and everything. So,
my time of monitoring pheasants and stuff tells me very much the same thing. You know, they're a game bird. Their brooding is very important. You know, there's just a lot of cool stuff goes on with. They're the same. There's a lot of cool stuff going on there. Where the thing about the grouse that's interesting is all about grasslands. You know, you see them using alfalfa fields a little bit, and then up here where I monitor the pheasants, they use the cropland some too, but not like the importance of the grassland. I mean, I just keep saying, you know, if we're gonna, this conservation is gonna depend on the grass, and the grass is gonna depend on the grazer. So I think that's another reason this grouse study was pretty fun, is it links the two, the conservation and the grazer, because this livestock is, from what I've seen, our best chance of keeping grass around here.
Well, very cool. I guess just give you an opportunity now to kind of talk about, you know, we've heard a few rumblings of, you know, some spotlighting and capturing pheasants, but just open it up and let you kind of share some, you know, some of the other research that you're working on and stuff. And you don't have to go into detail, but just
Sure.
what's interesting and what's happening now.
Yeah, so well, I guess from a pheasant standpoint, is this year myself, Tori Hovick, who is a range professor at NDSU. We started a project along with Alex Rochette, my technician here. We started a project where we're going to look at the landscape use of ringneck pheasants, primarily hens, throughout Southwest North Dakota. So right now we're focused mostly on Adams and Bowman County, Adams, Bowman, and maybe Edinger County. This year we focused on Adams County, but this is a 3-year project, we hope. And we are just going out and we're trapping hens and roosters, but the roosters we're only putting bands on, so maybe we can do some survival stuff with that. So if you shoot a banded rooster and it has our number on it, please call and turn that in. That's some good data. But anyway, so we go out to different landowners. You know, Emily with your group set me up with a couple landowners that have cascaded into other landowners. And so we go out, this was our first spring, and we trap pheasants at night using UTVs and bow nets. Mostly the UTV, you could do it on a lawnmower, is the noise. They need the noise at night to kind of keep them calmer. And then you put your light on them. There's really not a lot easy about catching a pheasant at night. They even run at night. I mean, it's a challenge, but it's a fun challenge. It's probably one of the more fun things to do, other than it's at night, and I'm not a great nighttime person. So, but it's really fun. This year was really quite a challenge. We did catch a few birds. We spent way more time than I've ever spent trying to catch a few birds. One thing I've noticed down here this year is there are some pheasants in some areas, but there's a lot of areas that there just aren't a lot of pheasants. And a good thing this year is we have a lot of cover. So I was looking for a few pheasants in a lot of cover. And a lot of the areas I trapped this year are places I've never been. Once I trap an area for a couple times, I pretty much know exactly where those birds are going to sleep, and you can go in there. They just are very consistent on their roost sites, and within a few hundred feet usually, and they're consistent from one year to the next. So now that I have an idea on some of these new sites where the birds are sleeping, maybe this fall when we go back out, and so we're monitoring the broods, and the hens are nesting right now, and there's even a brood or two on the ground. But this fall we'll go out and we'll do a mass effort, because fall trapping's fun because you can get the hen and her brood if you're lucky. So instead of looking for just the hen, which can take forever, if you get into the hen, you usually find a brood, and we will radio collar a bunch more hens, and we will band as many roosters as we can. The long-term goal here is to look at, as the landscape changes over time and due to the weather variability, hail events, new grassland plantings are very important, I think, for pheasants. So we're really focusing around areas that are getting new grassland plantings as well. But with all these factors over time, what does the use of pheasants on an annual basis look like here in Southwest North Dakota? So it's gonna be, it's a lot of work tracking these pheasants. And you know, I've done the pheasant tracking so long now that I'm all right letting other people do it a little bit, because I just feel like I know where that one's gonna be. I gotta walk way down there to find her, you know. So, but it's still fun, and every once in a while, like that's kind of weird. So,
well, very cool. It sounds exciting, and obviously, you know, the Southwest the Southwest is an important part of the state for pheasants in North Dakota. So just knowing what those birds use and need is going to be really valuable to us, at least putting habitat on the ground in the future. So appreciate the work you're doing, helps us do our jobs better. But yeah, I mean, I guess at that, we'll wrap it up. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today and being our guest. And I was excited about the information, so I'm hoping our audience will be too. Thanks for your continued leadership within Pheasants Forever and being a great volunteer and chapter leader.
Yeah, thanks for having me on today. This was kind of fun. If you keep doing this and you want to chat later in the summer and let you know what we're seeing out there. And I'm also doing some really cool stuff with honeybees and trees. So
Nice.
looking at different shelter belts and how they affect honeybees. So that I think is going to have long-term implications for shelter belt planting here in the state. So stay tuned there as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks.